Happy holidays, everybody. The Vikings gave you a lovely gift for this season, which is a win. They're 12th of the year, staying alive for the 1 seed, staying in position for the 2 seed. Let's get into everything here on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome into the Locked On Vikings podcast. Hope you all had a lovely holiday, or maybe you're still having it, depending on what you observe. Welcome into the Locked On Vikings podcast. I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Each and every day, the Vikings won again. Also, you can find the podcast on Amazon Fire or Roku if you maybe recently acquired an Amazon Fire or Roku for reasons unbeknownst to me. You could maybe find the show on there. Just look up the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Let's talk about it. The Vikings win 27-24. They are 12-3 on the season. Very few people saw that coming preseason, and I couldn't be happier about it. Vikings just obliterating their whole expectations on the season. I absolutely love it, with a whole bunch of really weird wins that looked exactly like this game. This was the exact, if you missed this game because it was on Christmas Eve and you were like in church or whatever, you just go watch a different, like if you watched any other Vikings game, you saw this game. This is the same exact game as the Saints game, the Commanders game, kind of like the Dolphins game, although the Dolphins game was a lot more over by the fourth quarter. They put the Dolphins away a little better. But there's so many games this year. The week 3 Lions game came down to like the last field goal attempt or whatever. And it seems like that is always breaking the Vikings' way. There is this situational masters thing that Kevin O'Connell always talks about. And I want to just like dive into if that really is what's happening here, if it's just luck. We'll talk about it a little bit later in the show, in particular with this game. But first, the broad strokes, because I know a lot of you couldn't watch. If you missed it, let me give you a quick recap of kind of what happened here. I thought the Vikings started off really strong. The first score of the game, I think they traded a couple punts, and then the first score of the game was a touchdown to TJ Hockenson on a busted Giants coverage, but they were already kind of at red zone range, and it was a really, really nice drive. I thought they blocked for the run really well for a lot of this game, and that helped them kind of stay ahead of the chains. They've got a lot out of Justin Jefferson as well. We'll talk about it, both of those guys later, Hockenson and Jefferson, but those were the main weapons of the offense. And those guys were really unstoppable on the entire day. It just seemed like they were converting, like, moving the chains. So a strong start with Hockenson touchdown, and then the Giants were driving, looking like they might go down to tie it. But Brian Asamoah, of all people, forces a fumble, which leads to a field goal the other way. It's 10-0. He forced and recovered the fumble, and Asamoah got a ton more run in this game. A lot of young guys got run. The Vikings said that they were going to do that, we've got a lot of guys with high snap counts. We're going to kind of spell them, get young guys in. You saw some Metellus going in for Harrison Smith. Eric Kendricks coming out for Asamoah. Cameron Dantzler didn't even play at all. He's still dealing with that ankle thing, so it was a Duke Shelley game. So you saw a lot of those sort of like penciled in starters taking some time off in this one to see if you can't keep them a little fresher for the playoffs. Because again, the stakes for these last few games are relatively low for end season games. So they're really focused on being ready for the playoffs rather than like freaking out and getting everybody hurt and too bruised up so that they can be the 2 seed instead of the 3 seed, But after that, the Giants drove right back down and scored a touchdown to, I want to say it was Isaiah Hodgins. There was a Richie James one as well. The receivers for the Giants killed the Vikings all day. We'll get into it more later. Then the Vikings on the way back at 10-7, they have a 3rd and 1, and Kirk Cousins gets drilled and throws up this back foot, wide open Justin Jefferson, but they couldn't connect this back foot thing. And that was kind of the story of the game. Kirk Cousins taking a hit, and the throws were pretty erratic. There was one, I think, really bad miss from a clean pocket that I can remember, but otherwise it's hard to tell what was going on with the coverage. He was holding the ball a very long time. It's hard to tell if that was the correct decision or not. We'll get back to you on it later in the week probably. But either way, the offense was really kind of struggling to get itself going in that way. because there was just, it was like they couldn't get every single facet of the offense on the same page at the same time. So that leads to a punt and another field goal drive later. It is tied up, and that was the first drive out of the second half. It's tied up at 10-10, and then another field goal drive from the Giants. It kind of felt like it was 13-10 at that point, and it felt like they hadn't gotten a real stop since like the first drive of the game, because the only other drive that they got a technical stop on was one where they were like down in scoring range and gave up a fumble. On the way for the Vikings trying to get a 17-13 lead, Kirk Cousins throws a horrific interception. I mean, just absolutely, the guy undercuts the route. Kirk didn't see it. Shouldn't have thrown that ball. Just a terrible one. But on review, there was a little bit of movement in there. Adam Thielen knocked the ball loose and it hit the ground, so it was overturned. Correct call to overturn. Probably Thielen's biggest contribution on the day. And instead, that drive continues and turns into a wheel route touchdown to TJ Hockenson, his second of the day. And it was an absolutely insane catch, one of those poster catches with all kinds of cool photographs of it coming out as this game has wrapped up. And then, so 17-13, the Giants looked like they were going to take the lead again. But Patrick Peterson gets kind of the same interception that Kirk threw. He gets the same interception on Daniel Jones. Textbook gorgeous undercut of the route. I thought the rookie cornerback that picked off Kirk did a good job too, for what it's worth, and gets the Vikings the ball back. And I believe they turned that into a field goal. Oh no, they didn't. They turned the Asamoah fumble into a field goal. But it still stopped the Giants' drive. They did manage to get down again. They had a 3rd and 5 that Richie James dropped a horrible pass. And Patricia Train had kind of told us that would be a thing for the Giants. The drops have been a huge issue for the Giants wide receivers. So that kind of reared its ugly head for them. 3rd and 5 leads to a 55-yard field goal. And of course they make it, because the best kicker in the league is whoever's playing the Vikings. That is established law. So that there's the kick. And then I think it was the ensuing Giants drive, the Vikings offense had totally fallen apart here. And then on the ensuing Giants drive, Josh Metellus breaks through for a punt block. I thought Metellus had an awesome game. There's actually a snap of him blowing up Andrew Thomas, of all people. A good left tackle getting blown up by a safety on a blitz, like a rotating blitz. It was a really cool rep. Didn't lead to anything. I think it was an explosive Giants play, but cool to put that on your tape. But in here, Metellus comes through, gets a punt block, and gives the Vikings a short field, Justin Jefferson touchdown, and we are at 24-16, an 8-point lead with about 3 minutes to go. 59 seconds it takes the Giants to march down the field, get the touchdown, convert the 2-pointer. This defense had a lot rougher of a day than the final score would indicate. And look, 11 possessions, 24 points. That's not the worst. Couple of turnovers in there, a couple of things that were the Giants messing up more than it was the Vikings defense being good, and a lot of guys getting killed in man coverage. Again, put a pin in that. We'll get to it later in the show. So it's 24-24, about 2 minutes to go, and the Giants have 2 timeouts. So you kind of have to do this like slow drive. You can't go all the way down in 30 seconds. You'll give them too much time, right? And the Vikings actually will do that. The Giants would not possess the ball again, which I think is really interesting clock management, because the Vikings go down. They take way too much time off the clock initially. They let 2 full play clocks go down, and the Giants don't take a timeout either. So we actually get down to like 25 seconds and the Vikings are still behind midfield, and you're going, oh my God, why are they waiting so long? But they run a tunnel screen in that situation, tie game, with the Vikings had to use one of their timeouts because of a sack. Tie game, tunnel screen, and Justin Jefferson gets it close enough for a 61-yard kick, which would be a Greg Joseph career high, a Vikings franchise high. Never happened for a Vikings kicker before, and Greg Joseph absolutely drills it down the pipe, 2-3 yards to spare, maybe. Definitely doesn't have a lot more leg than that, but a 61-yard field goal for the Vikings. The first one over 56 was the old record. I mean, it was absolutely demolishing the old record, and the Vikings will win. But that clock management situation is really interesting. And I do kind of want to circle back to it if we get time. If not, somebody ask about it on Twitter Tuesday for tomorrow. Send it to me at Luke Brown NFL on Twitter. I want to talk about things that happened on the offense, because I think it was a very interesting offensive day, and then what went wrong on the defense, because I don't think it was a good defensive day. I know the score felt okay. They got a couple of turnovers, and those count. Those play, like, I'm not going to just discount those plays, throw them out, and say if you take away the best things the Vikings did, they didn't do very well. But we'll get into all of that. But first, let me talk to you about daily fantasy made easy. It is Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the coolest way to play daily fantasy for me. The old school way where you come up with a whole fantasy-ish lineup with a flex and all that stuff, and then you put it into a pool with 6,000 other people, and maybe if you are literally number one and you picked the coolest corner case, you can win. I'm not into any of that. How about go pick 2 to 5 of your favorite players, whether they'll do better or worse than their Prize Picks projection, and if you're right, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. So if you haven't signed up yet, go to prizepicks.com or download the app and enter promo code locked on for a 100% deposit match up to $100. So you put in $100, you get $100 back. That's a 100% deposit match up to $100 with promo code locked on at prizepicks.com or on the Prize Picks app. Thanks again for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. For your second listen, go check out Locked On Sports Today. They're going over all of the biggest news and headlines, scores, and everything from the wide world of all sports. Also, check me out on Patreon, patreon.com/Luke Brun NFL. I would really appreciate it. You can see some tape breakdown stuff, all of the stuff from the Colts game. If you want to go relive that comeback a little bit more, is now open to the public, so you don't even need to sign up. You can just go watch it, but I would appreciate your support nonetheless. Let's talk about the offense. So the headline of the offense is this was the TJ Hockenson game. And if you're a fantasy person, like, the fantasy world is flipping out about this, because TJ Hockenson has been on the cusp of this breakout game. And there are people who have been in their fantasy playoffs. This is semifinal week in most of your fantasy leagues. Have been holding on to TJ Hockenson, and there's people who just would not give up on TJ Hockenson. And he had a few decent volume days, but they were waiting for that breakout. And here it was, their breakout. If you stood by TJ Hockenson, you are probably going to your fantasy championship because of that. Not to overshadow 133 yards for Justin Jefferson. He is still very much on pace. He just needs to have a couple more games like this week and last week. Somewhere 120, 130, which has been about average for him this month, to get 2,000 yards. We are on hardcore JJ2K watch, which is great because I called 2,010 yards preseason on the Minnesota Football Party. So I'm watching that. Those were kind of the two guys. They ran pretty efficiently, I thought, but they didn't run a lot of volume. And I guess when you've got Hockenson and Jefferson going so well, like, that's fine. I think I'm really happy with the offense on the whole, even though it didn't seem like the best Kirk Cousins day. A lot of inaccuracies, and pressure has a lot to do with that. So, adjust as you will. But a lot of holding the ball a lot, like that. A lot of sacks, and we'll see really what went open on the coverage, right? As always, I kind of reserve the right to take this back and say, oh, okay, nobody was open. Of course, he held the ball. That's fine. And we kind of have to take that play by play when we can see more of what's going on downfield and what you can see on TV. But if you were at the game, maybe you saw it better than me. Let me know. But ultimately, you got 200-yard receivers. The passing offense didn't exactly have like a bad day. It just felt like there was a little more that they could have accomplished with a little bit better timing and better chemistry and stuff. But speaking of chemistry, you kind of had Mr. Chemistry with Kirk Cousins, and that's Justin Jefferson. And then the guy with the worst chemistry with Kirk Cousins, because he got here in, what was it, October, in TJ Hockenson, and both these guys having huge games. That's a great sign. I love that headed into the playoffs. I'm really excited about that. I mean, the fade touch or the wheel route touchdown to TJ Hockenson. The first touchdown was a busted coverage. There was nobody on his half of the field. Like, he was wide open, just had to catch it and make sure you get your feet down before the end of before the back of the end zone. No problem there, right? But the second touchdown was an incredibly contested catch on a sort of switch release wheel route thing, something that guys love to do with the tight ends. Offensive coordinators love this with the tight ends at a 3-by-1, where you have the tight end kind of released behind both receivers. It screws up all kinds of coverage rules, and the Giants covered it pretty well. Like, they stood up to that okay. They just missed on the contested catch. You had like TJ Hockenson scooping it off of a helmet. It was a DB got the ball, like a hand on the ball, and Hockenson held on through it, bobbled it a little, but he was all in bounds and he recontrolled it, so there was no problem. Really awesome game from TJ Hockenson. And what I think my favorite play from him was a tight end screen where he actually made a big move, made a linebacker freeze up and ran past him, gained like 10 extra yards off of that move. I love that kind of thing. Seeing that from Hockenson. And this is clearly, there's a couple of games this year I think we don't win if we don't trade for Hockenson. I think that has immediately paid off. And that's very cool because the Lions also got drilled by the Carolina Panthers. So it is very funny. And I recommend that you laugh at them. The, the only other thing I want to mention is the O-line. I thought they held up admirably. There's a lot of pressure, a lot of sacks. A lot of that pressure took a long time to get there. I think there was a holding the ball issue here, and whether that's Kirk's fault or not, it's an issue with the offense. But and I'll circle back and try to answer that question later in the week when I can see the tape. But the quarterback had the ball too long in the pocket, whoever's fault that was, and the offensive line, I think that asks too much of them, and that led to a lot of the pressures. But ultimately, I mean, Dexter Lawrence, Kayvon Thibodeau breaking out, Azeez Ojulari, who did get hurt in the middle of the game, this Andre Patterson unit has been fantastic for the Giants. And I mean, when have the Giants not had a good pass rush, right? That's been a strength of theirs. And that was, to me, going into this game, I felt, okay, if we lose this game, it's because that D-line kicks the crap out of our O-line. And it didn't happen. I wouldn't say the O-line beat them up or anything, but they held their own as much as they needed to for the Vikings to be able to move the ball when you didn't have guys running wrong routes. And I will mention that too. There was a 4th and 2 in the second half that kind of felt like it was like a really big turning moment in the game. And I think the Patrick Peterson interception was on the way back, if I remember the order right. But either way, 4th and 2, and the Vikings threw deep. It was a sprint right, and Kirk Cousins threw it deep to Justin Jefferson. There were 2 guys in there. Adam Thielen was over there too. So it was this 2-on-2 situation. It was very weird. And a lot of people were like, well, why would you throw deep on 4th and 2? So here's the thing. I don't think they meant to. That was not correct. And I'm pretty confident in this because both Jefferson and Thielen ran a go route down the sideline. If you see 2 receivers that close to each other, something went wrong. That should never, ever happen. Why would you ever have 2 receivers next to each other on a play, right? You're trying to space people out. One guy can cover both guys. That's bad, right? So that shouldn't happen. And then you saw Kevin O'Connell talking to a very disappointed looking Adam Thielen, like a guilty look on his face because Thielen messed up. That's my take on that. I believe that was supposed to be like an Omaha kind of concept, or call it like sail, or I think they call it Omaha though, where it's an out route with a clear out through it. So kind of like dagger, but in reverse, if you can picture that. But Thielen was supposed to run an out route, and Jefferson was supposed to run like a go route down the sideline, which is really just to clear people out. You're trying to use his gravity to clear people, get people to go deep, and then Thielen catches one underneath, right? For the first down. It was like 4th and 2. They both run the go route. Cousins is just like, okay, I guess we'll just play 500 now, and heaves it up and it doesn't go. And that is how that play happened. But I do not think if your issue is why would you throw deep on 4th and 2, I do not think they intended to throw deep on 4th and 2. That was not the plan. But all of that is small stuff on the margins. I think play to play, down to down, I think the Vikings offense did well enough to win this game. I think the Vikings offense can walk away saying, okay, we won today and we feel good. I don't think the defense can say that. I think the defense got bailed out a little bit by the offense, by the special teams and that punt block and stuff, and the big kick. And I think this game looks a lot better on them than it should have, and they are lucky for that. We'll get into it. I'll try not to go too hard on them, but first, look, it is a lot of you are on break, especially if you're in school, or if you have a job that lets you have a lot of time off. You may go hang out with some friends, maybe partake in the devil's lettuce a little bit. Don't drive. All right. That's all fine, but just drive sober. All right. Don't you feel, especially when it's marijuana, you feel like, oh no, I'm totally fine. I've heard people say I'm a better driver when I'm high. That's not true. You just experience space and time differently and you think you're better. So don't do that, especially if you've been drinking and marijuana. Those are the 2 most common ones. And it can happen so easily that you feel so much more fine than you actually are, and you talk yourself into it. Just don't do it. All right. For me, for your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class, don't do it. All right. Drive sober, get pulled over, paid for by NHTSA. So let's talk about the defense. The Vikings defense struggled here. Now, I think they did what I thought that they would do. And if I could predict it, maybe the Giants could too, because they were really ready to prey on this. but they played a lot of man coverage in this one. And that's what they did against the Colts. It worked well, so I don't blame them for sticking by that. If you are frustrated at the defense for not changing anything, I implore you to go listen to some of last week's shows or to go to my Patreon. There's a video on it. It's free to watch. The Vikings have changed things. They have run more man defense. Duke Shelley got victimized. I think the honeymoon might be over there because he got absolutely crushed. He had a couple of contested catches. He said on Twitter he was hot on him after, but he let a lot of stuff happen to him inside. A lot of slants and skinny posts and digs. It's the same routes that beat their stupid cover 6 thing with nothing in the middle of the field. That cover 1 shouldn't lose to that, but the Giants did a really good job of essentially saying, okay, if we can widen out that linebacker, we can get a dig in behind him or a slant in behind him. So you would have Daniel Jones read something to one side or even just look to one side and then go back and probably see Duke Shelley got beat by like Isaiah Hodgins or shoot Darius Slayton, who he wasn't. Richie James was the leading receiver for the Giants, which is funny. But like any of those guys or Daniel Bellinger, like all of these guys for the Giants who are a bunch of no names. I mean, they were talking about how Isaiah Hodgins was on the couch like a month ago. Like these are not established dudes and they were killing us. And Patrick Peterson, who had a great interception, which I do think makes a lot of an otherwise bad day a little more forgivable. Because I do think like he got smoked on a double move by Slayton once on a sluggo. He let a whole bunch of stuff on crossers over the middle. But in fairness to him, he had to cover for a really long time because the pass rush wasn't getting home. Giants have a good O-line. So, I mean, Andrew Thomas is great. Evan Neal is not, and Evan Neal did give up 2 sacks. So, like, they did manage to prey on the parts of that Giants O-line that weren't good. But I think it's part of this Donatel defense is that a lot of the 4-man rushes are really fancy. They're not just lining up and going. And I think that's probably for the best on the whole, because if you just line up and go, it's a lot easier for the offensive line to deal with that. So you're making it a little harder, making the offensive line process. I think you have to do that if you're not going to be blitzing all the time. And they did blitz some. They got punished for it a lot. But it takes too long for those stunts to develop. And you need those guys to be quicker about it. So I don't mind the idea of doing stunts and twists and kind of living in this 4-man rush world, but you have to play it faster. It has to tighten up because it takes too long. It gets home. It gets there. If you watch just those guys, it influences the offensive line the way it's supposed to. Those guys get through the gaps the way they're supposed to. They get into the quarterback. It's just the ball is already gone because the coverage can't hold up because Duke Shelley can't cover Darius Slayton on a slant. And if you like, something needs to give here. You either need the coverage to be able to hold up longer, but the pass rush needs to get there. And in this particular game, I think the pass rush will let the coverage down a little bit because when you have if you have a crosser all the way across the field, I'm sorry, Patrick Peterson is not going to run with that all the way across the field. That's an incredible play. Most corners can't do that all the way across the field. That's not a play you can expect a corner to make. You cannot give them so much time that a receiver can go all the way from outside the numbers one side to outside the numbers the other side. If they can do that, they're going to get that completion like every time if you can't get pressure on the quarterback. Sometimes it was Daniel Jones making good plays, and credit to them for what they did. But the pass rush takes too long and the coverage can't cover for long enough to enable that. Somebody has to make somebody's job easier if we're going to live in this man-to-man world. And I do think it is a goal worth pursuing in these last 2 games. I think if they can figure something out in these last 2 games, try stuff, different personnel, whatever, get Cameron Dantzler back, see if that works better. Maybe get a Caleb Evans back, see if that works better. If they can do that, it is absolutely a goal worth pursuing because if they can live in this man-to-man world, I think that is a defense that can actually keep up in the playoffs. But right now, if you're getting cooked by Richie James and Isaiah Hodgins, you're absolutely getting cooked by A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith or Michael Gallup and CeeDee Lamb. Or, I mean, name your team, right? You are absolutely Chris Godwin and Mike Evans if they end up against the Bucs somehow. You're absolutely getting crushed by those guys if you are if you're going to stay in man coverage and you're going to run it this way. I think it still steps closer to an answer, even though it doesn't feel like it. But they definitely still have work to do before this answer is viable. And till then, they don't really have anything else viable. So this is definitely going to be the storyline to watch for the last couple of days. Tomorrow is Twitter Tuesday. You can find me on Twitter at LukeBrownNFL or at Locked On Vikings and send a question there. You can send a question to Gmail at LockedOnVikingsPodcast@gmail.com. And you can also leave a YouTube comment if you're watching on YouTube. I'll see it there. Or you can fill out the Google form that is linked in the show notes of every show. I will see you guys all tomorrow. I'm still on the road here on the holidays, so I know there's no "you like that" in the intro. Some people are sad about that. And I'm sorry if you hear children staying at my sister's and my nieces and stuff. So bear with me as I am on a remote setup, but we'll be back by Wednesday. We'll be back on the normal thing. So I will see you all then. And as always, Skull.